Hello everyone. Today we're going to answer one of the biggest questions from The Last Sunrise. Does Rye actually forget Julian after the surgery? Before we continue, here's your spoiler alert. We're going straight into the ending, Rye's surgery, her memories, and that final beach scene. So, does Rye forget Julian? The answer is, the movie intentionally does not give us a definite yes or no, and that's what makes the ending so interesting. Rye has been dealing with a serious medical condition, and doctors warn her that surgery could save her life but potentially affect her memory. That possibility terrifies her because she doesn't want to lose the memories that have become so important to her, especially her memories of Julian. Eventually, Rye's condition becomes too dangerous to ignore. After she suffers another medical crisis, the decision is made to perform the surgery. Julian supports the decision, even though he knows Rye could wake up without remembering him. And that's a heartbreaking choice for him, because Julian would obviously want Rye to remember their relationship, but he also understands that keeping her alive matters more. After the surgery, Rye survives, and then Julian enters her hospital room. He looks at her and says her name. Rye looks back at him, but before we get a clear answer from her expression, the movie cuts away. That's deliberate. The filmmakers don't show us whether Rye immediately recognizes Julian. Instead, we later see Rye swimming at the beach, and this is where we get the biggest clue. Rye says in voiceover that her memories are coming back to her one by one. That means the surgery hasn't necessarily erased everything permanently. Her memories are returning gradually. She remembers pieces of her past. She remembers the summer. She remembers someone she used to know. And then Julian appears. He approaches Rye and introduces himself. "Hola, I'm Julian." And then the movie ends. So, what does that mean? There are two possible interpretations. The first is that Rye has forgotten Julian, at least temporarily. If that's the case, Julian is introducing himself because he knows she may not remember him. And instead of being angry or walking away, he's willing to start over. That makes the final scene incredibly emotional. He's essentially saying that even if Rye has forgotten their past, he is willing to give her a new beginning. But there's another possibility. Rye may actually remember Julian, or she may be starting to remember him at that exact moment. The movie doesn't show enough of her reaction to confirm it, and director Carlson Young has said that viewers aren't supposed to know for certain. The question of whether Rye fully remembers Julian is intentionally left open for debate. That means we shouldn't interpret Julian's introduction as definite proof that Rye has completely forgotten him. It could simply be a symbolic recreation of how their relationship began. Remember, when Rye and Julian first met, they were strangers. Now, after everything they've experienced, Julian approaches her and introduces himself again. It's almost like he's giving them another first meeting. And that's where the ending becomes much more romantic than tragic. Even if Rye doesn't remember everything, Julian is still there. He's willing to meet her again. He's willing to let their relationship develop naturally. And if her memories continue returning, she may eventually remember everything they experienced together. The voiceover is especially important here. Rye says that her memories are coming back one by one. So the movie isn't telling us that her memories are permanently gone. Instead, it's suggesting that memory is a process. A face might come back first, then a place, then a conversation, then a feeling. And eventually, those pieces could reconnect. That also explains why the final scene feels hopeful rather than devastating. Rye survives. Her memories may be uncertain, but her future isn't over, and Julian hasn't abandoned her. That's really the emotional point of the ending. The movie isn't simply asking whether Rye remembers Julian, it's asking whether their connection can survive even if she doesn't immediately remember everything. And Julian's actions suggest that it can. He doesn't demand that she recognizes him. He doesn't ask her to prove that she remembers. He simply introduces himself. And that gives Rye the freedom to discover him again. There's also a major difference between the movie and Anna Todd's original book. The book gives a much clearer answer. Rye remembers Julian after the surgery, and the story eventually shows that they remain together. The movie deliberately chooses a more ambiguous ending instead. So, if you read the book and expected the movie to confirm that Rye remembers everything, the final scene can feel confusing. But that uncertainty is intentional. The movie wants us to decide what we believe happened after Julian says his name. And there are clues supporting both interpretations. If Rye has forgotten him, Julian's introduction makes perfect sense. If she remembers him, the introduction becomes a sweet callback to their first meeting. Either way, the emotional meaning remains similar. Julian is choosing Rye again, and Rye has another opportunity to live. That's especially important because the title, The Last Sunrise, initially sounds like it could represent the end of Rye's life. Throughout the story, Rye is constantly aware that her health could limit her future. She feels like every beautiful moment could be her last. But after surviving the surgery, the meaning of the sunrise changes. It's no longer a final goodbye. It's another beginning. Rye gets another day, another chance, another opportunity to make memories, and possibly another opportunity to fall in love with Julian again. That's why the final scene doesn't feel like a tragedy. Even if Rye doesn't remember everything immediately, she is still alive, and the person she loves is still standing in front of her. So, does Rye forget Julian in The Last Sunrise? The movie leaves it intentionally ambiguous. She survives the surgery. Her memories begin returning, but we never get a direct confirmation that she remembers Julian completely. The final scene strongly suggests that her memories may continue coming back, while Julian's decision to introduce himself again leaves the door open for their relationship to begin from the start. And honestly, that's probably the most fitting ending for the story. Rye spent the entire movie worrying about losing control of her life. She was afraid of her illness. She was afraid of surgery. She was afraid of losing her memories. And this also explains why the movie doesn't give us a clear reaction from Rye after Julian introduces himself. If we saw her immediately recognize him, the mystery would be gone. If we saw her completely forget him, the ending would become much sadder and more final. Instead, the movie stays somewhere in the middle. We don't know exactly how much Rye remembers, but we know that her memories are beginning to return. And that leaves room for something beautiful to happen after the credits. Maybe Rye suddenly remembers the first time she met Julian. Maybe she remembers the summer they spent together. Maybe she remembers how she felt when she was with him before she remembers all the details. Or maybe Julian really does have to start from the beginning and introduce himself all over again. But even then, their story wouldn't necessarily be over. In fact, it could become even more meaningful because Julian already knows what Rye means to him. He knows what they went through. He knows how deeply he cares about her. And now he has the opportunity to make new memories with her. That's why the ending doesn't need to tell us exactly what happens next. The important thing is that Rye has survived. She has another sunrise. She has another day to live. And she has the possibility of finding Julian again. The movie begins with Rye believing that time is running out. She thinks about her illness as something that could take away her future. But by the end, she is no longer defined only by what she might lose. She's defined by what she still has. She has a future. She has people who care about her. And she has the opportunity to experience life without constantly treating every moment as a goodbye. So when Julian says his name at the end, it can be seen as a simple introduction. But symbolically, it's much bigger than that. It's an invitation. It's Julian saying that no matter what Rye remembers, he is willing to meet her again. And maybe that's exactly what she needs. Because sometimes the most important memories aren't the ones we can perfectly describe. They're the feelings that stay with us. And if Rye's memories continue returning, perhaps she'll eventually remember why Julian mattered so much in the first place. Until then, she can simply live. And that's what makes the ending of The Last Sunrise so hopeful. The movie doesn't end by telling us that everything is fixed. It ends by showing us that there is still a future. And for Rye, that future might include Julian all over again.